This episode is sponsored by Viva Rays, the only eyewear company that truly understands your biology. Viva Rays are advanced blue light glasses designed with circadian biology in mind. Unlike typical blue blockers, they filter light in harmony with your body's natural rhythms, helping you sleep deeper, feel more energized, and protect your long-term health. We love companies that support biology-backed wellness, and Viva Rays is leading the way. Use code Quantum Healthy at vivarays.com to save 15% and support your sleep, focus, and natural energy the way nature intended. Enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. I'm Andia, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissman, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have Mollie Eastman, the sleep expert in the house. Welcome, Mollie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and to talk my favorite topic, sleep.
Yes, so I'm just going to share a little bit about you with our audience. So Mollie is the creator of Sleep is a Skill and the host of Sleep is a Skill podcast. And Sleep is a Skill company that optimizes people's sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavioral change. And after navigating her own insomnia while traveling internationally, she created what she couldn't find, and that was a place to go to learn about sleep as a skill set. And with a background in behavioral change from the Nonverbal Group, she became fascinated with chronobiology and its practical application to sleep and overall experience of life. So knowing the difference between life and sleep, or life with sleep and without, she has now dedicated her life to sharing the forgotten skill set of sleep. And in the spirit of that goal, she has created the #2 sleep podcast, written a popular weekly sleep newsletter for over 5 years, partnered with luxury hotels, lifestyle brands, coaches around the world, top poker players, and appeared on over 150 podcasts. Is that number still accurate? Is it over 200 now?
Yeah, that's so funny. I know. I don't know what the number is, but it's definitely gone up since then. So yes, I got to update that. Good call. Good catch.
And
And
it,
we
and
did just hit #1.
that's what I was, yeah.
Yes, thank
Oh,
you. Yes. #1 sleep sciences. Again, there's not a million sleep podcasts, but I'll still take it, you
you'll
know?
take it.
So, yeah.
Well, congratulations. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
why don't we start there where the journey all began and just share a little bit about your story with sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really began with my own struggles with my own sleep. So I went through a period of insomnia, and to define insomnia, really at its most basic level, is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. Now that sounds so like, ordinary and fine, but when you're in the throes of it, and certainly for me, this real acute situation, it really was one of the biggest, like, kind of hardest times in my life, just this rock bottom moment. And it came out of a whole stretch of time where, as a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, I was stressed to the max. And my husband and I decided to take our businesses on the road. We've been together over 14 years. And in the beginning of our relationship, we decided to put everything in storage, get a one-way ticket, do the kind of, at the time, nouveau, Tim Ferrissy digital nomad approach. And it seemed like a good idea. And yet the amount of stress that we're under, and responsibilities and employees and all the things. And I had come from a background where I didn't have a lot of money. I'd never really traveled much. So throwing then jet lag onto, and time zone changes and uncertainty of like where we'll be next and all of this, travel can bring up stuff. And so in throwing that into lots of stress, the symptomology for me came out of the first night I landed in Madrid, I couldn't sleep. I had a panic attack that first night of, oh my God, did I make a mistake? Like, all the emotions. And then night after night, I couldn't seem to get myself back on track. And then in retrospect, I did everything not to do to improve that situation. And yet I was none the wiser. And so, time just kept going. And then eventually, because it kept getting worse and worse, I found myself in this little like clinic in Croatia. And I go into the doctors there and I leave with Valium like it's 1962. And, this is certainly not supposed to, if anyone's listening and they're struggling with their sleep, please know that this is not supposed to be the way that you're treating insomnia. However, with the caveat that unfortunately, even in the United States, while CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is meant to be first line treatment gold standard approach, it is often not one of the first things that people will hear. And still, very often, people are leaving with some sort of medication, sleeping pill, antidepressant, et cetera, when they're struggling with their sleep. And we really have to educate that it has to go a whole other direction. But for me, that's what happened. And so then I find myself so we're traveling different places. So then in Budapest and Italy and what have you, in each place, new sleeping pills. So then I get Ambien, I get Xanax, all of these things. And I had come from a background where my family, I'd seen a lot of people go down the path of pharmaceuticals. I saw what that could look like. And it was very scary for me because it felt like, well, what is the plan here? Like, what, and it wasn't even necessarily solving my problem. It would just buy me a little bit of sleep, but really not making the difference. So flash forward, we end up actually eventually going back to the United States, largely because of my sleep issue. I end up going to the doctors. I do discover all these other things that I did have at play. So I did have a parasite at the time. I did have some other health implications that were certainly there. And one of the things, because now this fire is lit under me to figure out what does it take to get great sleep, or not even great sleep, but just to sleep well, period. And one of the things that completely changed the course of my life, and I certainly wagered that same is true for both of you, was this whole world of circadian rhythm entrainment, quantum biology, and it just completely turned my life upside down and the life of my husband and, people in our sphere. So once I started kind of implementing some of these things and getting my sleep back on track, now this completely changed the course of my life. I could not stop talking about it. So just sort of organically, these kind of small groups emerged because I remember vividly where I was when I searched like sleep support group, like why is there no sleep AA or something,
Oh,
right? Because and I don't know, have either of you dealt with kind of insomnia or difficulty with your sleep? Okay, right?
yeah. I had, it sounds a little similar. I had after my first baby,
After
it
your first
happened.
baby.
And
Yeah.
but I was actually diagnosed with Graves. Well, not initially, it was just
Oh,
hyperthyroid,
sure.
but
Sure.
parasite, like that. So when you mentioned
Okay, you
parasite,
nodded. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
But
so,
it's funny, I got the instead of the V drug that you got, I
yes.
ended up just on my own found Valerian.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I had
Much nicer approach.
much gentler, and that
Much
actually
gentle.
helped me. Yeah.
The
Totally.
other
Yeah.
V.
The other V.
The other V. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
and Diaz, you've had some insomnia in your journey too, right?
Yeah,
Right.
so little background about me. So I'm an addiction counselor and I'm also in recovery 17 years and my drug of no choice was methamphetamine. So
Ah,
I'm always curious what my sleep age, and I think you have a technical term for that, but what my
yes.
sleep age would be because I missed out on so much sleep when I was in active use. So
Makes sense.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then of course my patients over the years, definitely one of the things that I didn't know quantum biology at the time. I didn't
Of
know
course.
about
Yeah.
circadian health at the time. So they
Yes.
would process and group their sleep issues. And I just remember feeling so helpless. Like I didn't know, like they'd come back to group after I would give them like the sleep tips or whatever, and
Yes.
they would still be struggling. And I didn't at the time know anything about light, because I
Yes.
would definitely go a completely different approach now.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, yes, exactly. So you know how just, upsetting or, what could be there when you go through these periods with your sleep.
yep.
And so for me, it was like, why is there not options for people to be able to have these conversations like you were just pointing to and to share and to not feel so alone because you can feel not only alone, but like you're the only weirdo staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. And while that is not true, and statistically we know numbers wise that that is not true, but it can feel like that, especially if you're everyone else in the house is asleep and you're the only one awake. So started Sleep as a Skill, and I call it that intentionally because I truly believe that in our modern society, and again, preaching to the choir with this group, we've gone so outside of what it takes to have great sleep, and unfortunately, we've gone outside of what it takes to have great sleep because we've gone indoors, and we're not outside enough. And so, really, what's there is this opportunity to kind of relearn this often free and behavioral in nature and environmental in nature skill set. And so I mentioned the piece about poker intentionally because they are one of the main niches that I work with. They're high stakes poker players, and they are a great example because they are in casinos designed largely, at least cash game and tournament players, they're in casinos designed on purpose to confuse the circadian rhythm. And what is happening in casinos, there's no windows, there's no clocks, there's lots of stimuli, there's lots of blue light, there's a lot of stressors at play. So there's a lot there that can keep our rhythms kind of out of sync. And I mention them because if we can have real measurable shifts with them, we can certainly have measurable change with just about anyone. But also, I would wager that the average person is not too far off from those poker players, even though they are an extreme side of things. I think many people don't realize just how much time they are spending indoors and how much they are being divorced from those rhythms of nature. And if we know that from back in 2001, the EPA did the study, found that the average person was spending well over 90% of their time indoors. And I'm sure those numbers have gone up since then. And so if we know that we can make a difference with such extreme groups, we can absolutely make a difference with anyone listening. I've yet to find a single person that we're not able to, kind of move the needle in some way, shape, or form. So I really want to provide hope for the area of sleep because especially when we're talking about insomnia, but there's many other sleep disorders. There's over 100 sleep-wake disorders. Yes. So there is a lot there, but sometimes it can, when we're not sleeping well, mood can be impacted and our sense of self-efficacy can be impacted. So that is my real mission, to help support people to have that sense that we can make a difference here and certainly in alignment with what you all are speaking to.
For sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask, before we want to go talk about the stages of sleep, but before that, you guys both know about sleep age and I don't. Can you
Oh,
explain what
yes.
that is?
Yes.
How we can find out our sleep age?
Absolutely. So that's kind of an emerging thing that it's not quite available to the mass public yet, but it's being discussed as something that could, the same way we can look at biological versus chronological age, so we can test for that. We could then be bringing in through AI, taking a look at how are we sleeping? What is our sleep age? So if someone is 42, they might be sleeping like a 62-year-old, and indicative of the ways that their sleep is performing throughout the course of the night and what we would see with their sleep. Now, what the thinking is that there's certain signatures that make up younger sleep and certain signatures that can make up older sleep. And one noteworthy thing about one of the things that they found kind of very important that was a signature of older sleep was fragmented sleep patterns. So just lots more kind of waking up throughout the course of the night. And there are many reasons for that. And I'm happy to discuss some of that too, because actually many of those can be sleep disorders that are not, they never were they were not properly caught along the way and then kind of just kept going as we age and can get more augmented. So that would be sleep age. So if you kind of Google that, you can find that that's something that we're going to start seeing a lot more of, especially with the prevalence of AI.
Okay.
Like AI meaning like using Aura rings and things like that to track your metrics?
So this, as of right now, the thinking is similar to in a sleep lab. Now, to your point, I agree. I think that's what we'll see more of is consumer grade tech, because we're going to start seeing with Oura Ring, with Whoop, with Apple Watch, with Garmin, et cetera, that we're just going to be getting such a plethora of data from so many individuals. But for right now, the way they're talking about that sleep age and the kind of testing for that, the thinking is that would be akin to if you go into a sleep lab and then we hook you up, because one of the limitations that's missing, I know you mentioned sleep stages. One of the limitations that we have right now for consumer grade tech is that most of them are on hand and wrist. And so hand and wrist based sleep trackers. And when we talk about sleep staging, that's often the least accurate pieces of data that we're getting, because the problem is they're not located on the brain. And right now, our best understanding of our sleep stages comes from more more EEG readouts. And so unless we're having that, now there are some that are on the brain, but we still found that the usability of those are still not the best. They're falling off, they're displaced. So it does seem to kind of need that in lab at the moment. Now, this is 2025 and things are rapidly changing. So this could change in the near future. But right now, that's what we're seeing there. But that's not to say that there's not a ton that we can't glean from at-home tracking and even new at-home sleep tests that are going a step further than the at-home tests from, before.
Oh, okay.
I was in a sleep lab once, just test for sleep apnea because my mom had it quite bad. Ended up with a stroke at a younger age. And
Oh, sorry.
yeah, that's a long journey. She lived 14 more years, but
Okay.
she never ate food after that. Unfortunately,
Oh,
she lost her ability to swallow and her
yeah.
balance. Yeah, it was
Ugh.
really sad. My hero though, for how she survived,
Yes.
14 years. But
Yeah.
one thing I would say that was so wrong about the sleep lab, I was glad to have the test, but I
Yeah.
felt because there were noises and there was a
Yep.
little bit of light like coming through
Yes.
the door and all these things, like it wasn't. I think I'd be really for those at-home sleep tests if you could do
Yes.
it because maybe you could get a darker room and quieter. But in the hospital, I didn't think I slept, but they told me that I didn't have sleep apnea. But I was like, how can you tell? I never fell asleep. But
Yeah, the
apparently,
overall test in general will be more accurate if you can do it at home.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, so there's so much in what you just said. I love this. Okay, so the in-lab sleep tests. So in case anyone's listening is like, "Ugh, that sounds like too much or too expensive or too time-consuming or too stressful," and kind of cross it out as a possibility, please know that to your point, there's great at-home sleep tests, and even we're getting more and more advanced with this. There's even one that now you can put onto your limbs, so we can get more information around things like restless leg syndrome,
Right.
periodic limb movement disorder, and otherwise. So there's a lot coming. And what's amazing about this is, to your point too, that it's something that's very clear that we do tend to sleep differently when we're in our home sleep environment versus, to your point, with all the stimuli or the kind of pressure. It feels like a performance or something. Okay, now go sleep in this, foreign place with the noises and whatever. So knowing that there are those at-home sleep tests and that they're becoming so much more affordable. I actually have one company that I just started working with more recently, and there's a bunch of them, but that now even just we can use a ring for about $100 US dollars. So, there's a ton out there and can make it very simple and just throw on a ring, right? So that's one thing. But the other thing you pointed to, Laura, which was really great, is something known as paradoxical insomnia. And paradoxical insomnia is something that's kind of a term thrown out when we have the experience that we didn't sleep at all and or maybe very little throughout the course of the night, and yet then because we hear the story all the time, people go into sleep labs and they say, I didn't sleep a wink, and then the technicians will say, what are you talking about, like, we got all this sleep for you. And so it's this mishmash of kind of experience to the data that they're seeing. And so what this is often thought of is this paradoxical insomnia, where now this doesn't mean that there's not validity, because I dealt with this. It'd be a sense, and it'd be like maddening, a sense that, like, okay, I went through the entire night and felt like barely sleeping. And so the thinking is that we never want, if someone is dealing with this, one, I hope that it can bring solace to people, because sometimes it can be helpful to know, like, even if it feels like you're not getting any sleep, what's likely is you're still likely getting some micro sleeping or a bit more sleep than you might realize. Now, that doesn't put a cap on what's possible, because if you're feeling like that, and if when I was feeling like that, that is not a way to live. So during that stretch of time, what's often happening is you're kind of staying in these very light stages of sleep. So certainly not where we want to keep anyone, but it can sometimes help psychologically to know that there's some sleep being had so that you can still get yourself through the next day and help take some of that pressure off. Laura, I don't know if this lands for you at all. Did you see anything about that? Yeah.
Well, it's something I've noticed because I wear an Aura ring, and I wanted to ask you about the Aura.
Oh, I have lots to talk about that. Yeah, we do have one of the
Yeah.
larger databases of Oura Ring users from a sleep optimization perspective. So lots to discuss
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, two of my Aura ring questions are, one is, I've been noticing if I watch TV with my husband,
Yes.
it'll say, oh, you took forever. Either you took forever to fall asleep, or it'll register like I was asleep, and I'm like, wait a second, I was never I was just lying there. I guess I didn't move. But do you notice that
Yes,
with Aura that
totally. Yep.
okay. So
So
I
that,
usually adjust it and go, no, that's wrong.
oh,
This is when I
good.
really went to bed. Okay.
Kind of train it. Good. So, yeah, what you're pointing to is known as sleep latency. So, the time that it takes to fall asleep when you're beginning sleep initiation. And yet, as we know, as you pointed to, you weren't initiating sleep in any way, shape, or form. You're watching a show or
No.
whatever. Yeah. Now, what is very interesting, actually, I was just talking to, I mentioned my friend Danny Hamilton, and some
Mhm.
listeners might know of her work. Definitely check her out if you're dealing with any blood sugar instabilities. And brings in a quantum and circadian approach. But we were just talking about this just last night about how television there is certain research to support that it does seem to have almost this, when measured with EEGs in certain studies, kind of this interesting almost like trance-like state that some people can go into depending on the content, of course, and what you're doing. But it seems to be a bit more passive and almost, dare I say, meditative, as opposed to being on the phone and more active engagement and quick shots of entertainment. So, it's kind of a bigger, more philosophical question of, so many people say, "Oh, I don't go on TV. I'm not a TV watcher, what have you." But then they're like on their phone for, every second of every day.
Yeah.
So which one's better? Who knows?
I'm usually
But
watching a love story, so I'm probably just, very calm, in a
yes,
good
see?
state. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, the content matters. So it sounds like you're selecting things that are not
Right.
revving up your
Right.
heart rate or what have you. So yes, to answer your question though, we've certainly seen that. I've seen that for a number of individuals. Now, if we're seeing that for like long stretches of time, or we're seeing that really early in the night, then that could be something for us to delve into more deeply. Like, is the body really overly indexed, overly stressed, and calling for more kind of that relaxation state? So do we have
Mhm.
a strong enough sleep wake indicators and drive and amplitude? So that could be something we can look at. But if we're talking like, half an hour or something, often that can just be a sign that we're in a nice relaxed state gearing up to
Right.
sleep, which is actually, of course, what we're pulling for. So great question, because we hear that a lot.
Well, I'll save the second one. I think we do need to cover the stages of sleep just for the
Yeah.
listeners. Could you just briefly go over that? And then we want to ask you a couple questions on deep sleep.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm always really careful with sleep staging because so many people that come our way and thanks or maybe not thanks to wearables are coming in with a lot of stressors around the types of readouts that they're getting from their wearables. And they're saying, oh no, I'm not getting enough deep sleep or REM or too much light sleep, et cetera. And so I do like to preface that for the average listener, that they don't have to become an expert in sleep stage classification or any of these things. Usually what I like to say is that we can kind of think of your sleep and your sleep architecture in two key halves throughout the course of the night. So, on the first half of the night is where we tend to have a higher kind of rotation and cycling through more stages of deep sleep, which I know we're going to get to more specifics on these. But on the first half of the night is that higher ratio of deep sleep. And that's important time wise because if you are moving around your sleep staging, or sorry, your bedtime wake time, then you can be lobbing off the first half of the night, and then the body still tries to stay on time because, as we know, this clocks component of the body of trying to maintain workability. If we do move around our sleep wake schedule, we can cut off some of that deep sleep possibility. And it's all about largely, though, what is consistent for you. So trying to remove some of the morality if you're like a little skewing a little bit later or what have you. But of course, from a quantum biology perspective, we know that we're trying to tether this as much as possible to the rhythms of nature. So the first half cycling through more of that deep sleep, and then on the second half of the night is more rich in REM sleep, so rapid eye movement. And this REM sleep is really important from a perspective of almost our inner therapist, if you will. And so
Love it.
really, right? So really, really important for our emotional processes, kind of emotional regulation. And what can impede that is if we are cutting off some of our opportunity in the early morning hours to get that sleep. So whether we're waking ourselves up earlier to get to the workout class or whatever people are doing, or unfortunately, if it's not of their choice and they're dealing with wake ups throughout the course of the night, and now now they're having trouble falling back asleep. What usually is impacted is that REM. And on the first half of that night, that deep sleep, that one has actually been part of the reason that we're starting to see so much more press around sleep in general. And this started in around 2012 with the discovery of glymphatic drainage with a G. And so glymphatic drainage, is really can be thought of as that kind of master cleansing of the brain on during the first half of the night during that deep sleep. And that seems to be linked with neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. And so if we're not consistently being able to cycle through enough of that deep sleep, it does seem to put us at risk, or in the research, it seems to have some correlations. And now we're questioning, is there causation from that, kind of inability to properly be cleansing the brain each night? And it's this glymphatic drainage with a G call out, is that the brain actually reduces in size and then allows for this process of this fluid to then cleanse out and use gravity to help bring it out of the brain, literally. Now, if we're not really attuned to all of these zeitgebers or time givers from a circadian perspective, we might be doing things that could be impacting, certainly in the first half, that deep sleep, but then also could play a role in the second half of the night of that REM. And there are other things that could be impacting things like REM. So different prescription medications are really known offenders of particularly REM, but certainly of deep sleep, depending on what we're talking about. But, antidepressants are a big one that are impacting REM. And so there's things that we want to help people be aware of that they might want to be well informed, could be messing with their sleep architecture.
And that would likely mean they wouldn't be dreaming, right?
Yes, really good question. So there's a couple of things. So some people say, oh no, I never dream. Should I be concerned? What's going on? Now, I would say that's not always the cause for wild concern. Sometimes we have concern when people are saying they're dreaming nonstop throughout the night. Why? Because one of the ways that we remember our dreams is when we're interrupted during them. And so when we're interrupted during them, sometimes that can be signs that there's something going on with our sleep or behaviors or environment. So a really common one is sleep apnea or upper air resistance syndrome. And I say it's really common because it's millions and millions of people affected just in the United States alone, but certainly worldwide. And so many people undiagnosed. So, and especially women. Women are really, we're trying to sound the alarm now, especially as we age. So going through perimenopause and menopause, if you didn't even have sleep apnea, but you could develop it. So I'm saying this because if there are things that could be interrupting your sleep throughout the course of the night, like how you're breathing, that's an important one, and that will have you remembering more dreams. But that doesn't mean that the person that's not remembering as many dreams might not be still dreaming, but they might have more kind of complete sleep architecture in that they're not having all that fragmentation. So it is a little bit more layered of a answer there.
I'm assuming it's the deep stage, but can you tell us at what point are we paralyzed, where our body is going through? Yeah, there's a point where we're paralyzed, and I always find that like so fascinating.
Fascinating.
Like, wow. I hope I don't ever wake
Yes.
up during that time, because it'd probably freak me out a little bit.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. So that is during REM. And part of the reason for that is the beauty and the design of this amazing bodies that we're all in is because then we're not able to act out on those dreams. Because if you were able to act out on the dream when, whatever, in your dream, you're walking and going to get into your car or something. So the problems that could clearly happen if then we were actually moving in that, it becomes very clear. And unfortunately, there are some individuals that have the struggle where they're not fully paralyzed and there can be problems during REM. And so they are having elements of acting that out. Now, often that might be layered with certain things, certain medications, alcohol, other things might be at play. But those go in the real kind of REM disorder kind of buckets. And so there's something to be aware of there. But for the average person, yes, it's fascinating because that means that the body is so intelligent that it's able to kind of paralyze us during that stretch of sleep. Now, the ability to properly paralyze is actually quite a gift. And now some of us, though, if we're having signs like on our Aura ring that says a lot of restlessness, if anyone's seen that on the Aura ring, have you seen that? Okay.
Late, yeah, this
Yes.
stage of life. I've
Yeah, exactly. So that can be another thing that we want to look into. So if we are seeing signs of restlessness, one, again, I'm on a soapbox to always have people tested for sleep disorders. Even if you've tested before in the past, if it was a few years ago or whatever, you can still develop it later on. So just ruling that out, because restlessness is a big sign for some of these sleep disorders. But then beyond that, there can be other things at play. Like we had a neurologist on the podcast, Dr. Stasha Gomanek, fantastic guest.
yes.
Yeah, have you seen
I,
her? Great.
yes.
Yeah.
I've heard about her through the dentist Dr. Joel, I think it's
Oh,
Joel
sure.
Gould. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, she was, kind of a pioneer back in the day, kind of sounding the alarm around vitamin D. She also
Yes.
brought B vitamins into the
Yep.
conversation too, but certainly began with vitamin D and its impacts on sleep. And so she would point to, as we've all become many people deficient in vitamin D, that seemed to affect the ability to properly paralyze throughout the night. So she can go into from a neurologist perspective and go into the brain a little bit more in depth if you ever want to have her on. But what's fascinating is so she speaks to she has a great analogy. I'll just credit her where she mentions that if you picture a plumber, in order to fix a pipe, they have to, turn off the water so that they can properly do all the work that they need to do, right? And so she likens that to sleep and REM stage. And if you're not able to properly paralyze, and there's still some of this movement and restlessness and what have you, then this can impact some of the quality of the sleep that you're getting. And if you're, kind of bumping yourself out of these sleep stages throughout the whole course of the night, because if you look at the sleep architecture, it's, we're at an awake stage and then we're going into these deeper stages until we get to, in the first half of the night, more that deep sleep and you're really at that most relaxed state. But if you're having situations where you're getting bumped out, so in the case of sleep apnea, then you can't breathe. That's a very stressful thing for the body. So then you go right back up to awake state and now you got to go back down on all those stages again to get back to where you were. Obviously, you're not going to wake up feeling the best the next morning. So there's a lot there, but I want to leave people too with the fact that there's so much that can be done. And if you are someone that is dealing with, waking up feeling not fully refreshed, lots of that restlessness, lots of that moving, lots of wake ups throughout the course of the night or what have you, so much available and often free and, behavioral in nature.
You make me think of Ambien. Ambien is a drug that people get up and do all sorts of things, and it makes me think about what is the mechanism that is breaking down the ability to be paralyzed, because obviously
Yeah.
that being broken down and it allows the person to get up and do whatever with
Yes.
no memory of it.
I'm so glad you mentioned this because this is a big, big deal. And I'm actually very passionate on this topic because I have a very close family member that went through a really horrific experience with Xanax, for high dose Xanax for many, many years for sleep. And when getting off them, nearly died, psychosis, all these different things. And we see this. So it's a personal component there for me. But also, we see all the time where people are dealing with long-term usage of both, they're known as benzos and Z drugs. So Z drugs for things like the Ambiens of the world, a little bit newer, and the benzos, a little bit older, but still wildly prevalent in how often they're being prescribed. And they are only approved, both of these buckets, for short-term use, and yet we see people coming in routinely that have been using these for 10, 20 years or more. And then we've got ourselves into a whole mess of how to get off of those. And I'm so glad that you're speaking from that addiction perspective of side of things, because there's so many, there's actually a really great documentary that came out on this exact topic called As Prescribed. And it's called As Prescribed, right? Because people are taking it as prescribed. It's not like they're abusing these drugs. And yet, especially benzos and Z drugs can have some real difficulties for people in getting off of those.
Yeah.
And we need really educated practitioners of how to get off of those, because often people just be sometimes thrown into, rehab facilities and they're getting off these on a weekend and a week or what have you. And it's just can create a huge mess. Now, to your question too around what are the mechanisms, they are more hitting at GABA, so the parts in the brain responsible for creating more GABA and neurotransmitter. And yet if we imagine too, if we're kind of putting the brain and body into this more sedated state. Now you're getting this sedated sleep, but it's also throughout the entire body of this kind of sedation. And yet when that wears off, then we're having more of this excitability for people. So there seems to be this kind of loop where now you're needing to have that thing because you're having a rebound anxiety effect and a rebound insomnia effect. So you can anticipate that when you start taking some of these, unfortunately, it's right on the label, that it's very likely once you try to get off them that your insomnia is going to likely come back, and not only come back, but probably worse than when you first, were dealing with it. So those are real concerns we've had. If people are dealing with this or know someone that is, there's a resource that I like to refer you to. We have had them on the podcast, the Benzo Information Coalition, and they're a nonprofit dedicated to really educating on the real perils of people that find themselves on these medications, but also to provide hope that we can get off of these as well, or, mindfully. And this is always with, an educated and kind of benzo literate practitioner and Z-drug literate practitioner to help support along the way, because you really need support with those.
Yeah. The withdrawal should be medically monitored, especially with the benzos. Yeah.
Especially with the benzos. And it's a long-term game too. It's not just like,
well, it doesn't even start till like 2 weeks after you've taken it.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
If somebody's in withdrawal from like opiates,
yeah,
they will feel that
you'll
right
know.
away. And then that'll last about 2 weeks. And then it's right around that time if they were also abusing benzos where the benzo withdrawal kicks in. And then it's like they feel like they're back to square one. And there's a 50% chance of seizure, I believe. But
absolutely.
there's a lot.
Seizure. Yeah, that was, for my personal, kind of mission on that is because that close family member nearly died of multiple seizures, psychosis, all the things. But then we see it with so many people that are coming our way. So that's part of the kind of steps that we're making sure that they're supported along the process of
That's amazing.
Thoughtful tapering, because some of these tapering, depending on how much you've been taking and for how long, can be years in some cases, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have a question for you about alcohol and marijuana.
Yeah, totally.
Because people will say things like, oh, well, my alcohol and my marijuana or whatever helps me sleep. What would you say to them, people?
Okay. Well, so what I would say is now to validate their experience for a second, I can say that both of these substances, they do have evidence of support that it does seem to shorten sleep latency. We're talking about sleep latency, the time that it takes you to fall asleep. So kind of knocks you out. So it is true that they do tend to knock people out, not across the board, but in certain studies. But that's about where things kind of end as far as any sort of positive. And then what we unfortunately then start to see is all kinds of a mess thereafter. And even during, I mean, that way that we fall asleep is often from a kind of knockouts, sedated state. So any of that sleep that you're going to be getting is kind of compromised. But I will say one of the benefits, I think, from wearables is that that's one of the clearest things that we see for people, right? Like Laura, someone's using Oura Ring or what have you. That alcohol, especially, people be like, I had no idea. Of course, they knew they felt like hungover or dragging the next day. But when you really see those numbers and, things in red and whatever, then suddenly you get the message. And then I would say THC is a little bit more insidious. So to break them both down, alcohol, what we tend to see, and you can reliably see this on wearables, is that what you're likely to have is more sleep fragmentation, more restlessness, so more wake ups, higher body temperature, higher respiratory rate, higher heart rate. As far as what we see on the ground is that on average, anywhere from 10 or more beats per minute of a raise up in heart rate for the average individual. Now, this is, again, just anecdotal from what we're seeing on the ground, and that's just not from a lot of alcohol too. There's times where that's just like a drink or two, let alone if people have more. So heart rate going up. And then, of course, HRV markedly dropping as well for many people with alcohol. And especially it gets more potent the closer that you're having that to bed, but also not thinking that the kind of traditional advice of stopping 2 to 3 hours before bed is going to save you, because it's just often not the case. So alcohol being a big disruptor for sleep. And then THC, this is one where many people, even that have trackers, will say, oh, no, I sleep so much better with THC. And now I will say, of the two, we certainly will see that THC being a preferable option just from the numbers perspective, at least on the short term with as compared to alcohol. However, we can get into some troubles with THC for people because one, we can start to see difficulty with the dosage, so starting to need more to get similar effect over time. Also impacting REM in particular, so tending to impact negatively the amount of REM that we're getting. And then when you try to get off of that, having this REM rebound effect. So then you're likely to have just a lot more dreams and sometimes stressful dreams. And then people will be like, is this ever going to end? Do know if anyone's dealt with this, then it's usually a short-term thing of the body going after those dreams that they had not been able to have access to. And so there are those problems. Now, the other problems are that if someone's a Aura or Whoop user, they can often see kind of the nervous system indicators with THC. And often with THC, we'll see things like heart rate just tending to be maybe a little bit higher, HRV maybe a little bit lower, respiratory rate maybe a little bit higher, potentially body temperature a little bit higher. But some people will kind of choose to ignore that piece, and then they'll say, but look, I'm sleeping so much more. So sleep duration can often, be augmented for them. So I know that can get a little tricky because some people that are really struggling with sleep will say, well, let me just take this thing and this is going to help. And it's certainly not seemingly as aggressive as a hit as something like alcohol. And that tends to be true. And of course, case by case basis, there's cases where people are dealing with major pain issues, cancers, et cetera, that if we're up against that or some, much more serious medications, then of course there can be a time and a place. But for the average person, we're talking about more sleep optimization. We do seem to have more promise with things like CBD, CBN for sleep. So let me know if that answered those questions.
Yeah.
I'm glad you gave all that detail because I live in Canada and it's all legal here. And yeah, this younger generation, are using it to sleep. So I hope lots of people will hear this and hear that message and try and like you say, switch over to CBD or just even to get through. And then maybe you just get to the point where you fix your sleep. You don't need anything,
Exactly. Yeah.
Which we
That's the
haven't.
hope.
We would love to I know we're getting close to time, but would love you to talk about blue light, non-native EMFs,
Yes.
maybe that impact on sleep and even the good blue light during the day and how needed that is. If you could touch on a few of those,
Of
and
course.
are they big priorities?
Oh my gosh. Yes,
Okay.
100%. Yeah, exactly. So what I would say is that our primary approach at Sleep as a Skill is rooted in circadian rhythm entrainment and quantum biology. So what we're really looking at is beginning at kind of sectioning off our day into two-part kind of phases, because we are diurnal creatures, meaning we're meant to be active by day and at rest at night. So we're looking to have a really high amplitude of a couple of things, but one being very bright days and very dim to dark nights. And so with that, what we're looking to achieve is the positive aspects of blue light in the first half of the day, but of course balanced with all wavelengths of light by getting ourselves physically outside. It was literally part of the reason I moved to Austin, because I had been a Northeast person up in Maine, originally close to Canada. Yeah. And then had lived in New York City for a long time and what have you. And so those winters, and I wanted to be able to practice, when I'm preaching, but it's much, more fun when there's so much sun. I mean, not to say you can't do things with cold and what have you, but so it's so important that we are setting our lifestyle up to support brighter days, darker nights. And so getting that ample blue light on the first half of the day, balance with all wavelengths. And then on the second half of the night, that we are abstaining from those blue light sources, those man-made light sources. And we really just want to harken back to our hunter-gatherer days, fire, kind of these warm light sources, if at all. And so that's the difference we're going to make with our light options, non-native EMFs. All of these things are things that our hunter-gatherer ancestors would never have been exposed to. So we want to really take the blueprint from them because they were around for millions of years. Our modern society is just so like a fraction of a second of time as if we look at history. So clearly, we're on the losing side of things that have stood the test of time. And, so looking back to how we lived is definitely where we're going to get a lot of wisdom. So those non-native EMFs we want to be mindful of, But also, what I would say is if people are like, I know we talked about a lot of things. The most tangible things for people to walk away with, I hope, is to begin with the maximizing as much of those bright days, dark nights. And then at the same time, though, we want it to be as consistent as humanly possible. So choosing and selecting your sleep, your wake up time, especially, and having your wake up time really not kind of move all around. Now, from a quantum biology perspective, we know that then we can often bring that to align, hopefully, as close to some of the rhythms of nature as possible. And I will say, though, however, we do see that some people are waking up far before the sun or later or what have you. So wherever you are, though, we want to have it be as consistent as possible, 7 days a week. And that's what sleep really, really loves. So aiming to make sure you're doing that. And the reason I'm doubling down on wake up time is because wake up time is one thing where you do have more of a say around, whereas your bedtime, that's where we have a little bit more variability from a perspective of we're looking for you to check in on almost like hunger, right? Like your sleep drive can be akin to hunger, where there's certain times where you're starving and you want your food and you will have a big appetite, and other times where you're not as hungry. Similar things happen with your sleep, where there might be a little bit of variance on what time. Some days you're exhausted at whatever 9:30, and other days it's not the same. So you have a little bit more of a swing in the bedtime, and also we don't want to put pressure onto people to fall asleep because that always backfires. However, so you're still setting yourself up and setting the stage for sleep at about the same time, but letting that kind of come to you. But the wake up time, you can always have a say there. So we're ideally plus or minus around 30 minutes is the kind of the ideal swing. Now, of course, there's situations where things might shift a little bit, but even if you do have a rough night, we're still trying to keep it around the same so that you can get yourself back on track and maintain those rhythms.
I feel like you just answered our signature question.
The quantum element, right?
Yes. What does quantum sleep mean to you? I feel like you just hit so many pieces of that.
It's
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, and I think for me, I'll say that the biggest change certainly was the understanding the physics of light and the quantum aspect of light dark and how that can help act as this guidepost to your entire life. So we can, if we had more time, we could really break this down into kind of light being the up part of your day and the darkness being sort of the down part of your day. And this applies to all aspects. So your exercise timing, your meal timing, your thought timing, which is a fascinating area of research that our thoughts exist in a circadian rhythm. And so we see, from a sleep component, there's a great study called The Mind After Midnight. We had some of the researchers on that on the podcast, and they found that suicidality rates go up in the wee hours of the morning. Kind of flawed logic, kind of black and white thinking, catastrophic thinking tends to go up in those wee hours of the morning. And we can probably all experience that, right? They wake up at 3 and it's like, oh, my whole life's over. Everything's done. But then, right? Same. And then suddenly at 3 p.m. or what have you, then it's like, oh, things aren't so bad. And we have real data to support that that's the case. So these rhythms really are behind so much of our lives. And if we can work in conjunction with them, in tandem with them, I think that can be a real quantum leap for all of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Let's see if we can look up that study and put it in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a podcast on it too, if you want to hear from the lead researcher too. So just search Mind After Midnight, in our podcast or wherever. And it's really fascinating.
What is the name of your podcast?
The Sleep is a Skill podcast.
Okay. And for people to find you, do you have a website? Or...
Yep. So if they go to sleepisaskill.com, they can do a number of things. They can take a sleep assessment and get kind of targeted things back for them to support whatever's going on with their sleep. If it's wake ups, if it's, sleep duration, whatever's happening, then get them some resources. We also have a sleep newsletter called Sleep Obsessions that's been going on for over 6 years every Monday. So we've got lots of people in there, and we're really, I'll read every single email. And so often we can put in information that people are sharing. If, they're practicing different things with their Whoop or Aura, whatever, we can have screenshots and include all that in the newsletter. So you can sign up for that. We have the podcast, of course. And then we have things like Aura Ring audits, Whoop audits that we can run for you together to kind of go over your sleep stats and then give you targeted things that you can do thereafter. We have cohorts. We're about to be releasing a course that then will have a little bit more flexibility for people too, outside of just the cohorts. And then we have one-on-ones where we go really really deep where we do lots of different lab work, sleep tests, and then tracking with their sleep to really transform their sleep over the long term.
That's awesome.
Thank
Very
you,
cool. We'll
Molly.
make sure that all those things
Yeah.
are linked in the show notes, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you
And
so much for having me and for all the work that you're doing. It's fantastic.
well, thank you too for just really making this idea, bringing this idea of sleep as a skill, like instead of sleep, I guess, as an art, but
Yes.
and just your mission around promoting quality sleep through circadian entrainment. I don't know if that's enough out there, and also including the non-native EMFs. That's important to us.
Yes.
And maybe we'll all have a younger sleep age if we pay attention and learn all
Yes,
this.
totally. It's absolutely possible, 100%. And that's my big mission too. It's to bring, that hope that even if you're, in the trenches, like I've been at different points, that you can get yourself into a whole new world with your sleep, and that it can even be a blessing, which sometimes when we're in the thick of it, it can feel like there's no silver lining, but I promise that there's opportunity if you, choose to learn more and go in deeper that can really enrich your life on the other side.
Yes, very well said. Thank you so much again for your time. And
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thank you for sticking around at the end of this podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, Viva Rays, who allows for us to get this information to you. They offer top of the line blue blocking glasses, which, as we know, are critical for our health these days for blocking artificial light at night. Over 90% of our time is spent indoors under artificial lights, and this puts us all prone to circadian rhythm disruption. You can use the code Quantum Healthy for a discount. Link is in the show notes.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Endia at endiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.